Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast. I know you missed us as we had a week off, but the month of May was awesome with a bunch of co-hosts. I'm excited because we have two monumental moments in the 817 podcast today. Number one, this is Jimmy's last episode on the 817 podcast. This is where there's tearing, crying, sounds going right now. And then we also have the lovely Ann Zeta, who's coming on to take Jimmy's place as my co-host to the 817 podcast. That's air horns, claps, all that's happening right now. Jimmy, Ann, what's up?
It's the only time in my life I'll be referred to as monumental, so I'll take it.
Well, when you said his last podcast ever, I'm like, we could have him back as a guest.
Yeah, you know, dramatic is very kind of my style. You know, that's kind of a me issue. You know, but yeah, you know, Jimmy, how how's how's getting exiting Fort Worth? What's your take on where the pod is going? I don't know if you listened to any of the guest shows, but what was your take on where's it at? We're in a studio now. That's kind of new. We've been doing this for almost 3 years, man. So
yeah, that's wild. I mean, I'm excited.
You're like 30, right? So I've been a part of 10% of your life.
Pretty much. Well, more than that because we knew each other beforehand too. So I mean, I'm excited for y'all. I'm excited to see where it goes. I mean, it's, kind of crazy that it's been 3 years since we started, and we're just reaching out to random people we had connections to come on and talk to about stuff. And then the 2021 election happened, and things kind of took off. And I mean, I'm excited to see where y'all are able to take this after I bow out.
Yeah. And Ann, how did you feel? Now you did a great first episode. You said you're more nervous the second time.
I think the first time I was came in just not knowing exactly what to expect. And this time I was trying to prepare, and that tends to stymie me up a little bit. But I'm excited to be a part of it, not just texting you after the fact and telling you things that I thought about what you all talked about. But I feel like I've been a part of it for almost the whole time you guys have been doing it, because I've been a listener and then been on a couple of times. And that election you referred to came on during that 2021 election. And I've just been excited to have a platform to be able to talk about things that are important in the city of Fort Worth. And I love the way that you guys have done that over the years that you've done it, and wish it could be all three of us going forward.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of, we had some great co-hosts on, and we talk about the idea. So of having more co-hosts and not just being me and Ann on the episode. And we have some cool interviews coming up in the month of June and July. And then we also want our other co-hosts that were on to jump on, because we had a lot of great people as well.
Yeah.
Jimmy, was there anyone you didn't get to interview or you would have liked to have on the episode, or a favorite episode?
I mean, I think the big one is, we went back and forth on reaching out to people to try and get Beto on the pod last year leading up to that election. And, timing and everything, nothing worked out. It probably would have been like a 2-minute spot anyways. But
he's a busy guy.
Yeah, that would have been really cool. I won't make a joke about Chris Nettles.
Yeah. You're District 11 now, but Nettles never came onto the pod, as to District 8 people who are running a podcast in his
ghosted.
District. Yeah, ghosted. He did respond once, and then just never responded again. But it was it was all good.
Well, after my guest hosting the other day, I had a couple people reach out to me, including a couple of elected officials. So I don't know. In the future, we could probably reach out to a few folks and maybe have them.
Yeah.
I think my favorite, though, I was thinking back, I really loved the episode with Smooth Vega. I remember both of us were literally crying, hearing him tell his story, and leading up to really, I mean, not struggling in school, being kind of thought of by teachers as an afterthought, and now he is in his community, Beto is reaching out to him to drive engagement in their community here in Fort Worth, leading up to the last election, like that was just a really powerful episode from someone that is in the music scene, and then you see how they transition that into their like day-to-day life, living in a Hispanic neighborhood in Fort Worth.
Yeah, no, that was a great episode, for sure.
I think future episodes with people in the community and talking about the things that they're doing in the community is absolutely something that we should be pursuing, because I think there's a lot of people doing incredible things in our city and maybe don't have the platform and the visibility. So bringing that to the forefront, I think, would be a good thing for us to do.
Yeah. Well, Ann, I'm excited. I mean, I'm super ultra always dramatic and very technical on trying to swing for the fences. And so when I made a list of who would be ideal pods, you were my number one person on the list. And then I had a couple others down there who, maybe got too afraid or didn't have the time. To commit to weekly for something is a real commitment. So I also acknowledge it all. But to have this transition the way it has, I'm pumped where it's going. And Jimmy, if you want, you're more than welcome to stay in the text message thread.
All the news discussion that we do.
Yeah.
I asked him the other day whether I needed
kick you
to
out or not. And but yeah, man, what I'm really gonna miss is I'm all over the place, super loud, and you're just very gentle and empathetic and thoughtful, and I'm just mad at how you can just read an article in 30 seconds and then talk about it. So just you're really good at this, and maybe you down the road do another type of style like this with whatever your adventures are. I know you're trying to become a TikTok star too, so it's all.
I'll ring in from Europe or Africa, Asia, wherever we are, and talk about the walkable community I'm living in, and headed down the street to get all my groceries for the day.
Yeah. He's like, hold on, let me get my macchiato from this bodega. Wait. What were you guys saying?
Well, we love good examples from other places of things that we could try to implement here in Fort Worth as well. So that will be gladly accepted.
Yeah. And well, something y'all talked about when we were last together was the film incentive that looked like it wasn't going to pass at the time. One of the Republican officials was trying to hold up this film thing, and it seems like Mr. Sheridan, Mayor Maddie Parker went down there to advocate for the $200 million state incentive program to boost movie and TV production in Texas. It ended up, I guess previously was $45 million was allocated for promoting film industry through Texas Moving Image Industry Incentive Program. So this has been a big boost to the program. This was on the fence, but now we're here with it. What are your guys' initial yays and nays about, how this worked out?
I mean, I think it's great. We have had the Film Commission is relatively new in Fort Worth, and Visit Fort Worth has that Film Commission division that has been slowly growing and expanding, and this is a huge win for them as well as the electeds who were advocating for it. So now just continuing to ride that momentum and have more of that activity happening in Fort Worth. And as one of the articles pointed out, it doesn't just incentivize. And there was a big campaign by actors who have done work in Fort Worth as well. I saw it on YouTube or one of the social media platforms. A lot of actors talking about how this benefits everybody, from the big actor
that
who
commercial
may not live here. Yeah, the commercial was hilarious. It was great. I noticed a very big lack of female stars. I was are all the stars that live in Texas male?
Yeah.
What there is the Bros Club in Austin of like Wes Anderson and they all went to UT together, and I mean I think it does reflect that like there is a lot of talent in Texas going into the film industry, but when you're like pitching to these big budget Hollywood studios, like you gotta bring the actual like fundamental reasons for them to not just film it in LA or film it on a soundstage. And so like that talent that has grown up here knows the asset that they have in Texas, like actually being able to stand up to some of the other major states and major players. Even New Mexico before now was like well ahead of us in funding. Like I think it's a big win for the state, and having the film commission develop how it has recently like goes a long way in bringing those projects here.
Yeah. And so what they're also showing, like if you look at comparison, New Mexico has $100 million for a similar program, but then Georgia was $1.2 billion, I believe. I definitely know it was over $1 billion.
Yeah, it was $1.2 billion.
So when you hear that, when you hear like New Mexico, New Mexico's much lower than us, which makes sense. They're a lot smaller state. But then you hear Georgia with, 5 times, 6 times the size. Do you feel like that should be the goal? Or like, well, how do you feel people talk about this?
No, like that I would say is likely inflated because Marvel Studios does all of their stuff there. And so I think it's kind of like, well, we're here, like we need you to keep us here type of thing. And is there something as big as Marvel? No. Could there be something eventually that maybe is worth like getting on the ground floor to? Like, I don't think you don't make the jump to 1.2 billion from 45 million. And probably never need to go there. But that's kind of why Georgia's is as inflated as it is.
Got it. My always like what I think when we talked about this last time on the pod, I was talking about like the jobs and the consistency. And I think where I'm always very pro job is when it's like jobs that are working on something long that are going to be a part of the city for a while. Like, that's why I think like jobs from Bell Helicopter or Lockheed Martin are stable jobs because they're working on building some new plane or some new rockets. And it's, the film stuff just feels a little too, transitory, where it's like, you're not going to be making a video of a movie in Fort Worth for 10 years. I think that's, so I think I would love to see the tracking of what kind of jobs this brings for Fort Worthians and Texas as a whole, and compared to more stable white collar kind of, I'm the classic tech advocate of everything in Fort Worth. So I feel like those jobs bring stable and consistency that I'm afraid that these jobs don't bring.
Well, I think there is some, there's a lot of smaller studios in Fort Worth that are doing smaller work, not big blockbuster, movies bringing in Hollywood or whatever, but they're doing consistent work for local businesses. I know Trinity Metro has used a local studio to do some great campaigns to encourage folks to use public transportation. So, and Red Productions was very instrumental in getting these incentives and building up like what happens in Fort Worth. So while it may not be blockbuster movies, I think there is a consistent, steady job stream in this area. And so growing that foundation and structure will continue to give back to the community.
Yeah.
It's what makes places like this studio that we're recording in exist. So like maybe someone is here for 3 or 4 months, but I think that investing in this means that there's always somebody coming back in to take their place.
And even just podcasts around town have gone from recording in their homes and recording via Zoom to having studio space. I've noticed several of the local podcasts talking about being in studios and building out studios that are helpful to doing a more robust production.
Yeah. I saw on the Funky Panther, they were like building their whole, like they're building. So we're in one of the guys' room, like houses. They're like building a whole studio in his backyard, like a whole trailer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm like, and they continue to thrive. They're one of my favorites because it's literally the opposite of the 817 podcast. They're having a good time and they're super hilarious. And I learn a lot from them just being how funny they are. But no,
you got space in your backyard.
Oh yeah, I definitely got the space. I just don't know how committed. They're very committed because they're like all. Me and you are only together during the 817 podcast.
Yeah,
we do not see each other. They're like going out drinking together, eating barbecue together, going to concerts together, wearing matching outfits together. The Funky Panther is a full commitment that I am like, yo, love it and support it.
I could never match your style.
Me and you together all the time would just be, I don't know, it wouldn't be that exciting, I guess, because we're not that cool and funny, I guess, too. We're very chill and calm, when we're together. So, but let's move on to another juicy topic. We didn't really discuss who was going to bring this story into the pod, but we do know that I think the highest, if we said, what's the T of Fort Worth, what the cool kids say, today's really big topic is around what happened with the market. You guys can save me where I go wrong in the conversation, but apparently there was a vendor who applied for a space for a specific market. That market reached back out to that vendor and said, we have these biblical based values, so we don't support LGBTQ kind of vendors or stuff. So they denied her application. That message got out to the public and got picked up by Star Telegram, got picked up by the Fort Worth Report. The other weird thing is that it's called Roots Marketplace, which is a word used for a coffee shop. There's also some other kind of Roots Market thing. I'll stop talking there, and you guys tell me where I missed and what's what made it the story where it went from just a vendor losing a spot at a market to now our publications picked it up, and I think it's the most talked about thing on social media in Fort Worth right now.
Yeah, my perception was that the vendor, not my perception, the vendor had already been approved for this marketplace, had vended there before, and then I believe reached out to them after learning something to ask the question of wait, what are your values? And the response, was essentially, we don't support LGBTQ vendors, and we are going to rescind your your license. They said it as nice as you could say that message, which isn't really saying much, but and so Roots Coffee Shop not associated with this, Wandering Roots Market not associated with this, the other Roots Event Center we don't theoretically not associated with this, but has also has said that they will not preside over or allow same-sex marriages at their event. And so if you don't know, this market takes place on that little plot of land right across from
Stir Crazy.
Is it every week?
I don't think so. They had a couple in May. There was one on Mother's Day. And it relatively new on Instagram. I went and looked it up when I saw this kind of bubbling up and people asking questions and being confused as to who was the market that had declined the vendor. And I don't know the timeline of whether I knew she had participated previously, and I didn't know what sparked off the question between the market and the vendor themselves. I just saw the email that they sent her saying that she was not welcome to continue participating in their market. What I saw come out of it was a great deal of support for the LGBTQ community in the near South Side, which has always been a welcoming and safe place. And so folks were just wanting to make people aware that this had happened to this woman, and other markets were offering her spots in their markets. And so I saw that happening and was encouraged that happened, but disappointed that someone would make decisions like that and to exclude someone. And her vending materials were not specifically LGBTQ materials. It was just the fact that she herself had identified as being a part of that community, is my understanding.
Yeah. And I think it was just a real jolt to that community that has always been welcoming and supportive, and has felt like a safe place for that community. Because it Fort Worth in general, I will say, is a more welcoming place than a lot of other places. But the near South Side does exist as a bubble in Fort Worth that is especially welcoming. And so to have someone kind of to come in and then just pop that bubble, I think really shook a lot of people this week. But it has been encouraging to see the response of so many people rallying behind them and saying that this does not reflect the values of this community.
Yeah, that community being near Southside and the broader community of Fort Worth as well.
Yeah.
I think that's important to
Yeah, I mean,
say.
even a fan of the pod and a guest, Mike Brennan had a quote in the story around how it feels like a step backwards and all the things they work hard to do. Let me ask you guys this: like, what is your guys' take on this? Being a part of, I don't know. I guess like when you look at what made West Magnolia so special, it had a grimier kind of undercover when it was special. The chat room, just that boiled out. It was just a great, and now it's becoming a little more frou-frou, a little more high profile. Like it's becoming a little nicer. So like, could we expect more of this, in places like Southside, West Magnolia, as things get more elevated, as development gets higher? More
I don't
people
think
show up.
quality development is aligned with discrimination. So I definitely don't think that is what is going to be a result. And I think that the Near South Side Inc. organization works really hard to support businesses and support community.
Remember the Rambler? That was another one. I mean, there's been a couple things, and I would be able to knock on a couple of the South Side doors and ask who they vote for. I don't know if they're progressive. I don't know if Southside sellers. I don't know. I don't know the winery that just moved in there. I don't know. I know Morgan Mercantile is, but I don't know everybody.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean,
it's
I
something
think
we can't say that it does. The spaghetti joint. I don't know, but it does. I think it's something that we're doing a good job. I think we advocated for what we believe in those spaces. And as Fort Worth as a whole, as a county as a whole. But I think this is, hopefully it's a one-off, but I'm afraid that it could continue to rise as an issue, is I guess, why I bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, like, one, to me, I'm like, isn't this illegal? Like, not that anybody is going to spend the like time, money, and energy to go through like the legal action of, is this illegal? But I think that there's such a difference between like your marketplace representing what you think is Jesus's teaching is irrelevant to you as a business, like you can believe something and not have it be the like foundation of you discriminating against vendors or patrons. And I'm not even saying you should believe that because I don't believe you should.
Yeah.
But like, I think that if the community wants to have like honest conversation, honest, constructive collaboration, then like you also shouldn't be trying to scare off anybody who I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, like, because if your different viewpoint is like hateful and destructive, then I don't believe that like that's something that needs to come into the community. But if you want to like actually engage with whether it be a racially minority community, the LGBTQ community, if you want to actually engage with them, like, I think that a community should be welcoming to anyone. But if you're going to come in and use that viewpoint as like an irrelevant foundation of your like twice a month market, like that's something that I think the Near South Side, obvious, and everywhere in Fort Worth has to be on guard for. Because when we do look at our city and our county, like we elected Tim O'Hare, we elected Nate Schatzline to the state office. Like those viewpoints are very prevalent in our city, regardless of whether they come out like this.
Yeah.
So how do we actually engage with those people in a meaningful way, as opposed to just trying to like kick them out? But again, like if you're going to come in and be hateful, like do not, like you deserve the response that is, we're not going to accept that here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think having the conversation is important and being open to conversation is important. But as Jimmy said, not being okay with someone being hateful or discriminatory. That's absolutely not acceptable. But being willing to have the conversation and not saying, well, we don't want you here because you believe something that we don't believe. Yeah. That's doing the exact same thing that they just did.
I think the one part that I think this is an important topic because I think a lot of businesses have to navigate they navigate this very quietly. I think there's places, that aren't, people are hardworking business owners and they don't get into politics or cultural nuances, but it's becoming harder and harder to just be a good operating business and not having to stand up when things like this happen or being quiet. And I think it's going to be something that I think all small businesses, not just in Southside or West Magnolia, will have to know how to advocate or say something or have a community to say something. My big also take on all of this that got no attention that I really wanted to kind of hit was the Mayor Maddie Parker has her summer reading challenge, but she removed the Pride challenge, which were books around the Pride community that kids could have read for the challenge. And I guess she got 30 emails about complaining about that. So due to those emails, she felt called to remove the books from the competition. This happened a little before the market, but I feel this, to me, the thing about that Roots marketplace, you go to a mission statement, they kind of show how they roll. And I think this to me should have got more bigger attention, and because it was our mayor now changing something where the librarian said it's never happened before. So I also want to bring that to attention because I don't even know if our podcast listeners really have heard about that news, because the only place I'm seeing a news about it is on the WFAA. Like, I don't even see Fort Worth Report write about it. Star Telegram, I didn't see one. Maybe
even
I just
Fort Worth Weekly.
Yeah,
I mean, this seems like a right up their alley type of thing.
Yeah. So to me, this, if I was doing wins and losses, this would be my loss. That this wasn't the thing that actually
got more attention.
Yeah.
I think there is a petition out there. People have been sharing a petition asking that that not happen. The WFAA article that went along with the story, I think, touched on the fact that this was the first time that the library has been asked to change something in their programming from an elected. And I think the press statement indicated that the importance of leaving these types of decisions up to parents. And my take on it is that with the optional badge available in the challenge, that decision was left up to parents. So I agree with you that it was unfortunate that change was made. And I think it's been in there. I don't know for sure because I didn't go look at the challenges from past years, or I was unable to find those still up on social media. But they've been doing this Mayor's Challenge for a number of years, and I'm not sure if this has ever been brought to anybody's attention to the point where changes were made. So I thought it was an unfortunate decision and would hope that it be included in the future. And the books were not removed. They're still available in our libraries and that sort of thing. It just, as part of an extra badge that one could win by reading those books, was taken out of the challenge that's affiliated with the mayor.
Yeah. The petition has more than 30 emails. So, like, if 30 is the number that you needed to get to, like, it's there to go reverse the decision now.
Yeah, I think it was 1,000 when I saw it last time.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think the, like, extrapolation of this is is this a slippery slope to more interference in the library or in schools, just because 30 people sent an email about an optional thing that they had a choice of whether their kids could pursue or not. And I agree with you that I think this is something that potentially, had the Roots marketplace not happened, would have gotten more attention. But it, she kind of got the chance to drop this and then step out of the spotlight because another issue came up.
Yeah. But it's just, and even in her quote, she just kind of talks about how she wasn't trying to make this political. Ultimately, my goal is not to make any political statement. The program is just about fun and encouraging literacy for families during the summer season. And I think this is another example of the story you just talked about, how it just feels like everything is political, from a reading challenge to a market to running a small business. It's from a PR perspective, having a strategy of what to do in crisis or really knowing who you are as a person is going to be very important as we get to the big story, because as we grow in Fort Worth, this is only going to probably be more of a topic, some type of discrimination happening somewhere in some capacity. So let's move to the big story.
I'm sure you've seen this article shared because everybody who has ever existed in Fort Worth and wants to brag on it has shared it. But Texas Monthly published this article on May 23rd. It says, "Move over Austin. Fort Worth is the new Texas boomtown." Long story short, Fort Worth is growing a lot. Like, that's not a crazy news statement, but to see it highlighted on the level of Texas Monthly, I think was a significant thing for the city. I'm trying to get to the actual numbers. So Fort Worth, which saw a gaudy 4% increase in population since 2020, brings the population to over 956,000, number 13 on the list. So our number hasn't changed, but the way we're progressing, we should pass, I think, San Jose pretty soon. And the implication is that the difference in growth between Fort Worth and Austin is that Fort Worth could potentially pass Austin in the next 8 to 10 years. And potentially have Jacksonville pass Austin too.
That's the part I'm glad you said that part, because I got really confused on that line where it says, in fact, if the growth trends in Austin, Fort Worth, and Jacksonville hold for 2023, Fort Worth could displace Austin from number 10, sending the city down to number 12 behind Jacksonville, period. End of paragraph. I feel like there should have been in 2 years, in 5 years, when does that happen if the trends stay?
I think Austin was at 1% growth. So I haven't done the math, but
yeah.
Well, and I know there was another article called "Welcome to Cowtown. Fort Worth adds more residents than any other U.S. city." That was a Fort Worth Report article that talked about that we're getting approximately 20,000 people per year, and that's about 50 people per day. That doesn't speak to the comparison to Austin, but it does speak to the consistent growth that has happened in Fort Worth, and that has been pretty consistent. It's not a new thing.
Right.
We've been doing that 20,000 people per year for quite some time now.
And I'm usually the one to poo-poo on articles like this. So in my last episode, I won't change that trend. When we're talking about this, how big land-wise Fort Worth is the equivalent of if Austin got to count Round Rock as part of their population, so it's all relative. And it goes to show that you can make data and numbers say a lot of different things and pull different conclusions from them depending on what you present. To me, maybe this article gives the false pretext of, wow, Fort Worth is going to become Austin, which I just don't think that, density wise, I don't think we ever will, just because of the area that Fort Worth has to grow. But it does mean that Fort Worth has the potential to grow to a size that Austin could never, in and of itself, reasonably manage, because you'd then be talking about however many people are in Round Rock, however many people are in Lake Travis, Lakeway, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that comparison comes up between Dallas and Fort Worth as well, because we have so much more land available.
Right.
And we're big land-wise, and so there's a lot of vacant land out there that could fill up with things and people, and make us much bigger than we are. But I think these two articles about growth are important, but there are a couple of other articles that kind of fit into our big story that talk about managing growth, basically. And so I think that we could ignore the things that we could do to make this a positive, or we could embrace the things that we can do to make this a positive. And just growing is not something to be like tooting horns about and being excited about.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to, something that is talked about a lot, especially during election seasons, is flipping the burden of the tax base. And I think that that's something that even with this growth doesn't necessarily trend towards, the tax base flipping more towards commercial than residential. I would say it trends us the opposite way. And so as we continue to grow, we have to also try and figure out how to become more of a commercial base so that so much of the tax burden doesn't fall on our property taxes, which everybody runs on, decreasing property taxes.
And to your point about the smaller towns around Austin, lending to the growth that happens in that area, the Welcome to Cowtown article specifically talks about smaller cities adjacent are also growing fast. So we have that same dynamic here. And then touches on the importance of keeping open space. There's a quote from Kyle Walker at TCU's Urban Studies talking about how if you're going to be growing rapidly like this, it's important to have open space as well. And so the city does have an open space initiative, and it seems like we're being proactive in that regard to try to mitigate that and balance that.
Yeah,
and then that article also mentions the comprehensive plan update that's coming up. So to me, as a city planner, I focus in on that and think, well, that's a positive. We're going to be doing some major community engagement around that comprehensive plan, and then hopefully be more proactive about that growth so that we're not just reacting to 20,000 people arriving every year.
Which is the size of Crowley they reference in the article. It's like a new Crowley every year.
Yeah.
So,
and to that point, like we talked about, was it the Economist that did the big article about Texas, and like Fort Worth was mentioned in there a bunch? When we did the pod about that, we talked about what are the things the city needs to be laying foundations for so that as we continue to grow, we aren't facing affordable housing crises. We have the foundations built that allow us to sustain and continue to enable that growth well. And like you said, open spaces, talking about the comprehensive plan, we're going to talk about affordable housing. We're going to talk about transit. Like, those are the pieces that, if we had done them 20, 30 years ago, like, even better. But because we're having that forward-thinking conversation now, we hopefully will not have to be as reactive come 2030 when we do pass Austin in population and are continuing to see growth. I think setting that foundation is something that we can see the city has plans for.
And he's still saying we, and he's leaving us.
With the transportation budget stuff, is there any? I know in the article it also said we spend a fraction of what Austin spends on its services and $35 million less than Jacksonville. That seems like pretty stark differences. That seems pretty massive separation. And that is where you're probably just saying that this shows how we're not really a big city because we are just so big. But we don't, if we were dense, we would be having a much more larger transportation budget.
Well, I mean, also, Jacksonville just elected a Democratic mayor too, out of nowhere, for the first time. So
I've never been to Jacksonville.
So now Fort Worth does officially hold the largest Republican mayor city title. But I think one thing I've said about Florida on the pod a few times, having grown up there, is that one thing that is different about Florida is that the people moving there, or snowbirding there as we call them, they come down, they migrate south when the snow comes up north, and retiring there is that they know what they want in a community, and so they invest in things like public transit, like green spaces with great like amenities, bathrooms, really great like biking trails. Up until like the last 2 years, they've invested really well in schools because they want to incentivize their grandkids to, move down, come live with them. And so like, I mean, even growing up, I took the public bus to and from school, not a school bus.
Wow.
And so I think that's what's like different about Florida, but it does speak to, if we're going to like speak to the right of this podcast, like you can invest in public things and still be a Republican. Like you can be fiscally conservative and still know what your community wants and needs and invest in those things. And so that's where, even though like people look at Jacksonville and they're like, oh, high crime, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Like it's not different from us in that respect. And so I think it is something a place that we need to look at of like, we have very similar stories of being like the underdog afterthought of our state's big cities. And I think that we honestly mirror ourselves a lot more than people would necessarily know. And to see them spending that much more on public transit, I think does beg the question of what are they doing so much better than us, and how can we learn from them?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a cautionary tale because they refer to Austin clinging to its identity of a sleepy college town. And I think Fort Worth sometimes is attached to this identity of being a small town when we're really a pretty large city. And so to your point about the funding for transportation, the budget for the city's Trinity Metro public transportation services is a fraction of what Austin spends. And I know that Trinity Metro put out a graph a while back showing, comparable cities across the country and where they fell in that. And we were at the very bottom. But I think that this article is a cautionary tale. We don't have to wait until things get so bad and it's such a pinch that we're just struggling, and we can start now. And but like you said, we have to make decisions to fund it. And they're economically beneficial to do. It's not to your point about making economic decisions, regardless of what your political leanings are. These are economically sound decisions to do, not just some warm, fuzzy city planning, tree hugging way of looking at the world.
And is Jacksonville dense, or is it more like Fort Worth? I've never been.
It's more like Fort Worth, and I actually don't know where the line blurs between like Jacksonville Beach, and they kind of have that same sort of thing of like where does the city actually like start and end. But I would say it's similar to Fort Worth in that it has a semi-dense downtown and then sprawls a little bit from there, especially to the beach side. But it does remind me like James Russell, who is a writer in Fort Worth, does a lot of just independent stuff, wrote an article 5 years ago, January 18th, 2018, about a report on Fort Worth talking about the state of the city. And I won't like read from it, but you can read it now, and he could have published this article this week and you would have been like, oh, okay, like I see a lot of the same things. There's a few things that have changed. Maybe we can drop it in the show notes as a reference if you want to check it out. But I think it's a interesting place to start from of we've been growing like this since this article was written 5 years ago, since this report from an Austin-based company came out 5-6 years ago and said, is Fort Worth doomed? And you can read that article and you can say,
he would have made a great come on for a guest co-host. I met him once and I'm like, man, he like said he loves me in like a minute, and I'm like, dude, he's but yeah, no, that
you can look at it, you could say, how have we changed, how have we not? And where now that we're continuing to focus on these things, continuing to grow, what do we need to start changing?
Yeah, and I guess, Ann, like, what's your take on, because does this seem like a relay lap that we always come to this story every 5 years?
I mean, it's like we keep saying, we keep talking about how fast we're growing. And I'm pleased to see the other articles that we're going to talk about when it comes to this growth, because some of them are actually the doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there is a bit of a move towards the doing. I don't know if you want to tee up them, but on the Newtown Post Nowtown Post, they referenced that Fort Worth Housing Solutions is looking to acquire several properties for affordable housing, and the two locations that they're looking at, Franklin at Samuels and the Ramble and Rose in the near South Side, is bringing affordable housing to two areas that potentially are becoming more and more unaffordable. So that seems like a proactive thing to do, addressing the affordability that people are going to be facing when they're moving here or trying to stay here as this growth occurs.
Especially for like two service industry oriented areas right there of like potentially servicing downtown, servicing the near South Side, like giving people a place to walk to their job from home.
Absolutely.
I would be such a huge thing for Fort Worth.
Yeah. And I think that the trend of trying to have a mix of incomes for housing and not do concentrations of affordable housing in one spot, but including it across the city so that you have people of all walks of life with the ability to live, work, and play. I know that's a city planning buzz term, but in an area is really important. And then that cuts down on all the people that have to get in their cars and drive places
Exactly.
too. So, and those areas are heavily covered by transit as well. So I think you can get to the places that you need to go beyond just the walkability of the neighborhood using transit. And then another article talked about land banking. I don't know if you want to give us the specifics of what that article talked about and where it came from, because I don't have that in my notes.
The city of Fort Worth is considering creating a land bank in effort to address the need for more affordable housing. Through a land bank, a government entity can buy underused, abandoned, or foreclosed property, maintain it, and then sell it at a lower cost to approved developers. While land banks remain sparse across Texas, there are over 300 land banks nationwide. As Fort Worth fleshes out details on its proposal, the Fort Worth Report spoke with an expert who helps people understand land banks across the country to see what Fort Worth needs to do to keep in mind on their process.
And I think we've done some land banking in the past. I think we did some before the last recession, and then when belt tightening occurred, some of that got put on the back burner. And so it's good to see that coming back again. I would be interested in taking a look at what property the city already owns, because I think there are, if you look up on TAD, whenever I see vacant property that I think this shouldn't be vacant, something should be able to happen here, more housing for people, more businesses for people. Sometimes I look up those pieces of property on TAD and find that they are already owned by the city of Fort Worth. So it might be interesting to make sure that when we're doing that type of work, that we are coordinating with people who live in that area already, people who have small businesses in that area, so that these are bringing those opportunities of ownership for both housing and businesses to communities that already exist there. So I think it's a displacement, a tool to discourage displacement or stop displacement as well.
And I think with like Fort Worth has, especially I would say a lot of older properties that have sat vacant, a little bit more dilapidated for a while. I'm excited to see the groundbreaking, I think is this week, for the market building that'll be the retirement community. Like, I feel like a land bank would be a great asset to Fort Worth for some of the redevelopment of some of those places as well, and using those old buildings as the assets that they can be, but that a developer who is maybe solely looking at profit, it would be hesitant to come in and spend a ton of money to start developing from scratch. And I think that's where, like, you read about this and you can see why in Texas they don't really exist, right? Like, Texas is like gung-ho capitalism, isn't necessarily compatible with the government buying land and quote-unquote taking away the opportunity to for someone to come development.
That's
but
what
it's a form
letting
of
market decide. That was quoted in that article, the concern that it takes it out of the market.
I'm reading that part right now. It says the city will have the expert being discussed. He said a city will have some pushback from residents when creating a land bank program. There's this idea that a government entity is interrupting the opportunity for citizens to purchase the property, gaining an unfair advantage. He says actually it's serving more as a safety net for community members who are harmed by the lack of quality land opportunities, whether that's green space housing or whatever, that's the presence of negative land is kind of so.
Yeah, I think it's that intentionality around working with current residents and current business owners that would need to be done in partnership with any land banking that a city does to make sure that it's for the benefit of the community in which those properties are located.
And then I think it goes along with, like, we see cities thrive and we've seen areas of Fort Worth thrive when public-private partnership happens. I mean, that's a lot of what has propelled the near South Side forward. That's a lot of what has propelled all of the developing areas of Fort Worth forward, is having good public-private partnership. And I think that a land bank goes a long way towards doing that, especially in communities that don't necessarily have a developer screaming like, "Oh, I need to get in there right now."
Yeah. I know we did a story way back in the day around, like, I don't know if it was like the federal park story and how, like, Texas doesn't have a lot of parks because all of our land is owned privately. And, like, when you look at other states, the percentage of their land that's owned privately by, I guess, citizens were really high. I would be curious just to know, like, how much land Fort Worth owns and other city owns in the state of Texas compared to other cities, to just even know that. And I wonder what kind of impact does something like the reason why this doesn't happen in Texas is because we're just so more privatized and individualized rather than having federal governments owning land, state owning land, counties owning land, cities owning land. I wonder what makes Texas different in that compared to other
and I think in the land banking, it's not necessarily to continue to own the land perpetually. It's to own it, to give it the opportunity for others to purchase in areas that maybe they wouldn't have been able to previously. So I don't, speaking to how much percentages and all that, I would have to do some research to speak on that with confidence.
Yeah, I'm always one of those, like, how do we, same thing with the film thing we were talking about. It's like, how do we actually put the numbers to what we say this is, like, really, really big on? But it just, it'd be interesting. But I think that's what you just said. I think Texans would really value that, where you're actually doing this to then give it to the individual
give the opportunity to the individual.
Well, and that, I think that's a good transition to talking about the East Side Transportation Plan, because we've been told for however many years that, like, we can't get a nice grocery store in East Fort Worth because incomes aren't high enough and everything. And so, like, would a land bank be a transitional plan for someone to come in and say, like, okay, this is enough of a vote of confidence, enough of a bridge to get us to start that development?
Yeah.
So that's that Fort Worth Report article that was titled "East Side Transportation Plan Offers Comprehensive Approach to Safety, Land, and Land Use." They had a couple of meetings to kick this off, and I attended 2 of the 3 initial meetings that they had.
Come on now.
And there's a survey that's still going to be available for people to fill out to give their input on this discussion. That will be available through June 30th. And I was told at the meetings that there'll be 2 additional rounds of engagement. And so their goal is really to reach beyond those who just typically show up at meetings. So it seems like a really broad, comprehensive way. They mentioned getting kids involved, which made me realize that in the last week or so, I've had 2 organizations reach out to me to participate in summer programs around land use and urban planning and transit. And the city is seeming to want to reach out to young people as well. So I think that's a really positive thing. But that East Side Transportation Plan, basically, the first couple of boards, when you came to the public meetings that they had, showed all of the planning that has gone into this area over the last, I don't even know how many years, probably 20. And they're saying at this point, we've done a lot of planning. Are we doing another plan? No, we have a lot of plans already. So we're here to discuss how to implement these plans and move forward. And, this is an area that hasn't been seeing a lot of underinvestment and lack of investment. And so I think that this is a real positive moving forward. And it's a comprehensive collaboration as well, because they're including Trinity Metro, North Central Texas Council of Governments, the Texas Department of Transportation. Because while it is along the corridors and there is a major focus on transportation on those corridors, whether that be in individual cars, walking, biking, or taking public transportation, it's also speaking to the land use around those. And to your point about bringing things that people have seen lacking for many, many years, such as a grocery store. So this has been like the most comprehensive, bringing in all of the people, breaking down the silos in the governmental agencies and within the governmental agencies that I've seen in a long time. And so I think it's a real positive thing that could do well moving forward.
Yeah, I think about, as an East Sider, and thank you for leading that story, because I read it like 5 times and I was like, I still don't know what's happening. But it's I feel like, man, I see the vision of downtown, A&M at the south, Panther Island in the north, and then I see what's happening in South Side so quickly and West Magnolia, and it's like, man, this is so important, because I don't, if someone asks me to visualize East Side, Fort Worth 10 years from now, I don't know what I'm seeing. I don't know what I see, but I feel like in other areas of Fort Worth, I could tell you what other people are saying we're going to see. So this is a really exciting direction, and hopefully some more vision comes from the plan. And
even one thing that I just thought of is like we have the zip zones, we have the dash that'll get you around the cultural centers. Like I think one thing for East Side is it lacks a vision because it lacks any connectivity between the little silos of like the Handley district, and then you've got like Texas Wesleyan, and then I mean even like weird, Coffee Folk and other random things that are closer to Lancaster. Like there's no real way to get around all of them without driving, and so like how do we come to a more unified vision that like includes Race Street also, of like how East Fort Worth can have a vision together. So I mean,
there's a major transportation component to this, because that bus rapid transit or whatever it ends up being, because there's some discussion about whether that would be center running or running against the curb. That's all part of this too. So I think that connectivity piece is definitely what they're wanting to make better, so that the neighborhoods along those corridors can access them without getting in their cars, so that people can get to all of those places along there. I mean, I share with people that I was an East Side resident when I first moved to Fort Worth. We lived all the way over off of East Chase, and I worked in Handley. That was my very first job while I was still in college. So being involved in this East Side stuff has been something that I've been doing for 33 years.
Did you take Division and Pioneer down? Or
I always I set my GPS on my phone when I'm driving to avoid highways. So I often do take Division all the way from Arlington and not go on to 30 at all. So, definitely.
We went and saw Abraham Alexander perform on Friday for his listening, and it was because the Rangers game, we took it, I think, pretty much all the way to Oak Cliff. I mean, to the Kessler. It was kind of cool. But no, that's awesome. Well, see, this is what I'm really excited that Ann's on the pod, because I feel like Jimmy was our city transportation building city person, where I was like maybe the more business tech growth person. So now we got the guru here, who's like super.
The guru
you got the one who actually knows what they're talking about.
The one who was texting all the corrections for the last 3 years.
So now you guys, you get it directly, not revised on the next episode. I do want to, as we end this and move to wins and losses, I do want to also just point out Fort Worth's growth is not just impressive in Texas. We were the number one city between July 1st, 2021 and July 1st, 2022 with populations of 50,000 or more. We were the number one city nationally. So I think that's even just a crazy time to be here, a piece. So let's go ahead and move to wins and losses.
I was going to say I can keep it on the east side for my loss.
There you go.
This is good.
We make a smooth transition. My loss, I'll just say, is like I feel like the District 11 runoff has really gone off the rails, especially with what I would consider like position-wise as like two very like centered Republicans with their messaging. I feel like we're just way into, like Rick Herring's like, burning down buildings and I hates your kids. And it just feels like we have really gone off the rails from a very interesting endorsement of, the most progressive candidate, Tara Wilson, endorsing Rick Herring. And then Jeanette Martinez, who is registered as a Democrat, works for a Democrat, but then has like the POA endorsements, the firefighter endorsements. I don't know.
Jimmy just said on record, we have two Senate Republicans running for the District 11 position.
I mean, let's be practical about like what their positions are. I don't really know what to say, but it has become a mess in what started as like a seemingly very collaborative race. I think these guys both signed the NICE pledge too, so
no more there.
Yeah. And as someone who like says that
I thought this is what you wanted.
And so as someone who says that like we should have more like disagreement, I think that like the personal attacks and like just the fabricating of lies doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah.
That's what I can leave it as. Is like this doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for your first and last vote in District 11.
Yeah. Well, second because I already got So Rick will be my last vote in Fort Worth. So look at me, someone who has voted in Republican primaries. You all said I was too partisan, too whatever, but that's how I'm going out in Fort Worth.
Look, that was a great loss. It's going to be as a District 11, I can relate. And your loss. What do we have here?
So we touched on it a little bit. I just think that June should be a month to celebrate LGBTQ, as we should celebrate that community all the time, all year round, not just in June. But this June has just felt a little bit like we've had a lot of focus on negativity. But this also, I always try to make my losses a win, or at least find a pathway to the win. And I think next week we will be having a guest on the pod, Tyler Long, who heads up Trinity Pride, and we can talk a little bit more about the celebration side of things and getting back to that celebration in June for a community that is a big part of our community.
No, a lot of stuff with Chick-fil-A, the Southwest billboards. What was it, Jimmy? Southwoke? Was it?
Southwoke.com. They can't figure out how to get it down. No one will take credit for it.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. What about wins? Ann, you want to go first?
Sure. I think I had a couple which are not connected to each other at all. There was a Fort Worth Report article on the art of dying, a Fort Worth business aiming to plan and support through death. And this is a couple of local folks that have started a business to talk about end-of-life planning and also provide companionship through end-of-life efforts. And I think that this is something that people don't typically like to talk about. It can be a touchy conversation, but they are partnering with Leaves Book and Tea Shop on June 29th to have a conversation around the services that they provide and the things that they do. And I, for one, think that that's something that is a good thing to be adding to our community. And then the other one, completely not connected to that one at all, is Trinity Metro is adding some new bus stop improvements to their
Yeah, I saw like a little iPad with the time on it on that picture. It looked like that.
Yeah, they're going to
cool.
have like real time stuff,
Yeah.
and then they're much nicer than those green mesh stops that they've had for 100 years, and I think are a little dated looking. But I took a bus recently from the Sacramento airport into Midtown Sacramento, and they had real time GPS telling me it told me what the schedule was, but then I could see that the bus was running a couple of minutes late. It's a regional bus that comes all the way around the county there. But that was a really nice thing to have, and it helps people feel more comfortable about whether that service is going to be there and get them where they need to go in a reasonable amount of time. One of those new prototypes is right there in front of the skate park on Hemp Hill.
Cool.
So you can check that out over there. But
Those are
improvements
great
in
wins.
transit.
Yeah.
My win is Meta is partnering with the National Juneteenth Museum. So they've announced a partnership to help fund the new museum, as well as their grant will sponsor the creation of a 3D virtual video tour of the campus. The virtual tour is supposed to launch this fall, so we'll get an early look at what's to come in the museum. Really cool to see the Facebook data center that I think broke ground in 2015, investing in the community, and a cool partnership for the Juneteenth Museum to have as well.
Yep, and we're also going to have Jared on Juneteenth.
Yep.
So that's really cool to get more insight as the new CEO. I think it's been only a couple months since that's been announced, so it's going to be cool to have a deep dive one-on-one with him and getting asked kind of the conversation and questions around what that could look like.
Yeah, the description of what they're planning to have there is like a community center. It's way more than a museum. Theater and black box,
Business
and
incubator.
And I think that having those kind of assets spread out through the entire community could be a really positive thing for Fort Worth.
Yeah. Well, we just completed our June pod, our first episode of the month. Thank you guys for being a part of the show. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend. Give us a 5-star review. Leave a comment. We always like those. And we'll be continuing to go with a ton of other interviews and upcoming dates. Those have been a lot easier now that Ann's a part of the team here. We've been getting interviews, So, Jimmy, though, man, have a good time. Rock it. You'll come back looking like Castaway one day, and we can have you on.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan.